Every 4 years, billions of people plaster their faces with paint, drape themselves in flags, and scream at their televisions. The FIFA World Cup isn't just a sporting event, it is a global religion. We tune in for the tear-jerking victories, the spectacular goals, and the underdog triumphs. But what you don't see on the pristine green pitch is the absolute chaos simmering just beneath the surface. Picture the glitz and glamour of international soccer. Then mix in murderous drug cartels, brutal military juntas, massive billion-dollar bribery scandals, and ruthless dictators who use the beautiful game as a literal matter of life and death. You think your favorite team losing is a tragedy? Try being told that if you concede one more goal, you'll be thrown into a torture dungeon and your family will never see you again. Suddenly, that missed penalty doesn't seem so bad. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the darkest, wildest, and most dangerous moments in World Cup history. Grab a seat, because this match is about to get incredibly dirty. Let's kick things off in September 1993. The Colombian national football team is strutting into Buenos Aires to face Argentina on their home turf. Now, playing Argentina in Argentina is usually like willingly stepping into a wood chipper, but the Colombians, they were absolutely unbothered. They didn't just beat Argentina, they completely dismantled them, 5-0. It was an utter humiliation for the home side and a revelation for the visitors. Back home, the entirety of Colombia basically threw a countrywide block party. Even Pelé, the undisputed king of the sport, watched this absolute clinic and confidently predicted that Colombia would win the entire 1994 World Cup. On paper, they were practically gods of the pitch. But off the pitch, they were returning to a country that was spiraling into absolute madness. You see, the Colombia of the early 90s was effectively ground zero for the most violent cartel wars on the planet, and football was right in the crosshairs. To understand how insane things were, you have to look at the daily reality in Colombia. Judges were quitting en masse because of cartel death threats. The government was slapping curfews on 9 major cities, including Medellin, which had a staggering murder rate of 380 per 100,000 people. It was basically the most dangerous city on earth. And the cartels? They absolutely loved football. By the late 80s, these drug lords realized that buying football clubs was a wildly efficient way to launder oceans of cocaine money. Pablo Escobar effectively ran Atlético Nacional. The Cali cartel bosses controlled América de Cali, while Gonzalo Gacha owned Millonarios. This blood-soaked era was notoriously dubbed narco-ball. Everyone knew it, nobody officially admitted it, and the cash flowed like a river. This dark money made the Colombian league insanely competitive, but it also meant that crossing the wrong guy didn't just get you fired, it got you a toe tag. If you think I'm exaggerating about the stakes, let me introduce you to Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. In 1983, the Colombian justice minister decided he was going to investigate cartel cash in football clubs. Shortly after, he was gunned down in his car. Then there's the terrifying case of referee Alvaro Ortega in 1989. Ortega officiated a match in Medellin and had the absolute audacity to disallow a late equalizer for dangerous play. Big mistake. An anonymous caller told a radio station that Ortega had just cost the cartel's chief bettors a mountain of cash. That very night, Ortega was shot 9 times outside his hotel. The violence was so out of control that the entire Colombian league season was abruptly canceled and no champion was crowned. The message was crystal clear. You do not mess with the cartel's money. But sadly, the players themselves were about to learn that they weren't immune to the bloodshed. Enter Andres Escobar. No relation to Pablo, by the way. Andres was Colombia's star center defender and an absolute beacon of hope. In a sports culture suffocating under the weight of drug money and violence, Andres was famously calm, measured, and universally respected. They literally called him the gentleman of football. He even penned a column for the newspaper El Tiempo, where he passionately argued about unity, responsibility, and how football could help the fractured nation heal. By the time the 1994 World Cup in the United States rolled around, Escobar was one of the most admired athletes in South America. But the pressure on the squad was suffocating. The cartel bosses back home had placed astronomical bets on the team to win the tournament. they fully expected results, and they had incredibly persuasive and terrifying ways of making sure the players knew exactly what was on the line. The hype train derailed almost immediately. Colombia opened a '94 tournament with a shocking 3-1 loss to Romania. It was a brutal blow, but the reaction back home wasn't just disappointment, it was pure menace. Before their second match against the host nation, the United States, the team hotel's fax machines and phones started blowing up with death threats. Coach Francisco Maturana and midfielder Gabriel Jaime Gomez were specifically targeted. Maturana later admitted that he was effectively being blackmailed, with anonymous voices dictating exactly who he was allowed to put in the starting 11. So, picture walking onto the pitch in front of a screaming crowd, knowing that the wrong move could literally cost you your life. It was under this agonizing cloud of terror that Colombia faced the USA, and tragically, things went horribly wrong. Colombia lost the match, knocking them out of the World Cup and sealing a horrific fate.
After the crushing elimination, friends and teammates practically begged Andres Escobar to stay in the United States. They knew the temperature back in Medellin was boiling over. But Andres was a man of honor. He insisted he had nothing to hide and hadn't done anything maliciously wrong. He just wanted to go home. Before flying back, he penned one final, incredibly poignant column for El Tiempo. He wrote, "Life doesn't end here. We have to go on. We only have two options. Either allow anger to paralyze us and the violence continues, or we overcome and try our best to help others." It was a beautiful plea for peace. But just 10 days after the ill-fated USA match, on July 2nd, 1994, the unthinkable happened. At 3:30 in the morning, outside a Medellin restaurant, Andres got into his car. He was suddenly surrounded, shot 12 times, and murdered. Witnesses at the scene reported something absolutely chilling. With every single trigger pull, the gunman allegedly screamed, "Goal!" Andres Escobar, the gentleman who just wanted to heal his country, died in the hospital at the tragically young age of 27. His funeral was massive, drawing over 120,000 heartbroken mourners. Eventually, a man named Humberto confessed to the shooting. He happened to be the driver for an alleged drug trafficker named Santiago, a guy with deep cartel ties who had supposedly lost an absolute fortune betting on the Colombian team. Humberto caught a 43-year sentence, but guess what? He only served 11. Santiago and his brother caught a measly 15 months for obstruction of justice. It is widely whispered that the prosecution was suddenly derailed by massive bribes. Justice was never truly served, and the lead investigator openly questioned why his bosses shelved the case. Now let's pivot from cartel kings to a brutal dictator. Welcome to Zaire, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 1974, Zaire made history as the first sub-Saharan African nation to qualify for the World Cup. Their absolute ruler, President Mobutu, was absolutely ecstatic. Mobutu had been ruling with an iron fist since 1965, and he viewed football as the ultimate tool for national identity. To celebrate the qualification, he played the ultimate sugar daddy, gifting every single player a brand new house and a car. But wait, it gets better. His military generals threw such a massive jealousy tantrum over this that Mobutu had to buy them all cars too, just to keep the peace. It seemed like a massive windfall, but things turned into a complete nightmare the second the team touched down for the actual tournament. The players quickly discovered a massive problem. Their promised match bonuses had mysteriously vanished. Turns out, corrupt officials deeply entrenched in Mobutu's regime had allegedly intercepted and pocketed the cash the players were counting on. The squad was absolutely furious. These guys weren't about to just roll over and take it, so they hatched a wild plan. They decided to strike. They told management they were flat out refusing to play their upcoming match against Yugoslavia. Even 2 hours before kickoff, they were digging their heels in, staying off the pitch. That's when the violent threats started. The players were bluntly informed that if they didn't lace up their boots and play, they would be shipped straight to a literal dungeon. Faced with a horrific fate, they caved. But what followed was one of the most bizarre displays of defiance in sports history. The Zaire squad went out onto the field, but they refused to actually put in the effort.
They were completely unmotivated, essentially letting Yugoslavia run rampant all over the pitch. The final score? A catastrophic 9-0. It remains one of the heaviest and most embarrassing defeats in the entire history of the World Cup. To the clueless global audience, it looked like an African team totally out of their depth on the world stage. But in reality, it was a deliberate capitulation. It was a massive protest against the men who had robbed them. However, embarrassing a ruthless dictator on international television is generally a terrible idea. After the match, Mobutu's elite presidential guards swooped in, locked down the team's hotel, and barred all journalists. The entire place was sealed off. Then, they delivered an ultimatum that would make your blood run cold. The guards told the players exactly what would happen next. If they lost their final match against Brazil by 4 goals or more, they would not be allowed to return home. Now, let's be perfectly clear about what not returning home meant in Mobutu Zaire. Mobutu ran one of the most terrifying regimes in Africa. Political opponents were routinely imprisoned, tortured, and executed without a second thought. The threat of exile meant total financial ruin, being permanently separated from your family and constantly looking over your shoulder for the secret police. So, the Zaire players were stepping onto the pitch against the reigning world champions Brazil, literally playing for their lives. They were exhausted, terrified, and desperate. Brazil went up 2-0 early on, and you can only imagine the sheer panic setting in. The Zaire players started doing anything and everything to burn the clock. Late in the second half, Brazil earned a free kick. The legendary Brazilian player Rivellino stepped up to take it. Then, the single most baffling moment in World Cup history happened. A Zaire player named Mpup Ilunga suddenly broke from the defensive wall, sprinted full speed at the ball, and booted it as far down the pitch as humanly possible before Rivellino had even struck it. The crowd erupted into laughter. The players looked completely confused. The Romanian referee casually strolled over and handed him a yellow card. For decades, the world mocked this moment as pure incompetence. But here's the crazy twist. Mpup did it entirely on purpose. In interviews later in life, he confessed he knew the rules perfectly. He was deliberately trying to get a red card so he could be sent off. He was risking his life to protest a regime that was robbing him blind, and he was absolutely fed up. Thanks to Mwepu's wild, time-wasting antics, Brazil only scored a third goal. The final score was 3-0, exactly 1 goal shy of Mobutu's deadly threshold. The players were finally allowed to go home, but the punishment was far from over. When they finally touched down in Zaire, they were immediately escorted straight to the presidential palace. Mobutu was waiting for them. He coldly confiscated all their passports, banning them from ever leaving the country again. He also slashed all funding for the national team, leaving the sport to slowly collapse. Many of those brave players ended up living out the rest of their lives in devastating poverty. Mwepu died in 2015, never getting to see what happened next. Miraculously, the Democratic Republic of Congo qualified for the 2026 World Cup, holding Cristiano Ronaldo's Portugal to a 1-1 draw, bringing the nation's football story full circle after 52 years of darkness.